A lot of men with anxiety make the mistake of thinking that they don't have any emotional trauma. But what if that belief is actually the thing that was keeping you stuck with anxiety? I'm going to tell you in this video why that's actually true and how your beliefs about you not having trauma could actually be the thing that's keeping you stuck in a self-reinforcing loop of anxiety. Now, this is a very common issue that I see with men in particular, right? And there's actually a very logical explanation for it. And so I want to break down 3 reasons why your emotional trauma from the past is actually creating your anxiety in the present. And I also want to tell you why your mind will actually try to suppress that and how you can reprogram those hidden emotional triggers. So, just yesterday, I was talking to a client of mine who fits this exact description, right? He came to work with me because he was suffering with anxiety. And, he's a very typical Australian man, right? So, very hardened exterior, um, you know, got that general idea of what a masculine person should be like within society, what a masculine man should be like within society. And, was telling himself this story that he didn't have any trauma or he never had any, significant events that happened to him in the past. And the reason why we do that is because as men, we have this idea that we should be strong and that the only thing that creates trauma is like extreme events, wars, or like really the kind of extremely traumatic things, right? That's just not true. Trauma is anything that leaves an imprint on your nervous system and your emotional body, right? And so that could be anything from getting, beaten by your father or your stepdad, getting bashed by, someone else in society, if like when you're a kid. It could be even little things like not having your parents around when you were a child, right? Children, their brains are different, right? They're emotional and they need a circle of safety. And so, as a fully grown man, you will reason and you will logic with your experiences, and you'll try to essentially um, play them down, or you'll compare them to others. You'll try and rationalize, or you'll just suppress. You say, "No, I didn't really have any of those experiences. I had a pretty good childhood." And I hear that so often. People will just like shut that part of their life out because someone else had it worse, or whatever you experienced wasn't actually that bad. But it's that belief that actually says, "No, I don't need to look at that." It creates more of the anxiety in the present, because then you're in the present experiencing anxiety, wondering what the hell is going on, right? But you're still just suppressing the things that happened in the past. Now, trauma and anxiety is a learned behavior. So it's essentially fear. Your anxiety is fear, and you learn to have this fear, right? Whether it's in public places, whether it's around certain people, whether it's in certain environments, socially, right? Whatever it is, in relationships, at work. And this is a learned thing, and you learn it from earlier in your life in these different events that happen. And so when we go into trauma, it's not necessarily about like necessarily healing your inner child or doing any woo woo stuff, but it's just about understanding that the experiences that you had in your past shape your experience that you're having in the present. And this is what my client realized on a mammoth one-on-one call that we had yesterday. Usually I don't do like 2 hour coaching calls. Usually they're not that long, but yesterday I had a 2 hour call with this particular client. And, after some deep diving into the issue, we really discovered that there were, several significant events that happened through his childhood and through his teenage years that were fear inducing, that were scary, and that were terrifying, right? Maybe not as overly traumatic as he might have originally thought, but once we dived into it, it was obvious that these events that happened were traumatic events that were causing his experience of anxiety in the present. And so, again, once you understand that, at least where you look at it clearly and you go, yeah, I can see how that makes sense. That what happened earlier in my life would affect this, what I'm experiencing now. And just that understanding, it helps you to reason. It helps you to have some logic, right? Now, why does our brain shut this stuff out, right? It's because your conscious mind is trying to protect you, right? And it thinks that it's protecting you by suppressing or comparing or avoiding or rationalizing. Because then, if you do that, it means you don't have to deal with that deeper emotional pain that's unresolved. However, you do need to learn how to deal with your emotions if you want to experience peace and calm and happiness in the present. So, if you're someone who's very anxious right now, or if you're an anxious man who's experiencing a lot of anxiety or even depression, or this constant feeling of like self-doubt, maybe you're not good enough, right? You've got to understand that if you want to actually feel confident in yourself, you want to feel peace within yourself, you want to feel happy within yourself, right? You've got to understand that you've got to really deal with these suppressed emotions that you've been blocking for your whole life, right? But again, your conscious mind will try to avoid those things because it's trying to protect you from a deeper pain. Okay? So the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to actually shift your perspective on this idea of trauma, right? Understanding that it's not necessarily some big war, you know, death and craziness that needed to happen, but it's just little events that left an imprint on you emotionally and on your nervous system, right? Could be the smallest insignificant little thing. And when you develop that higher level of self-awareness and that shift in perspective, you can start to turn those old experiences, which you've been suppressing, into lessons, right? Okay, cool. If I learnt that then, how can I change what I'm doing now? What needs to change now so I can actually have a better future? So it's really shifting your perspective on the past and the traumatic things that you may have experienced, right? And I'll give you a personal example because this is what really helped yesterday with my client. I've got a few different things that happened in my life, right? I used to fight with my mum when I was a teenager, and the unconscious part of me would say, "Oh, I was just a selfish young kid," right? But the conscious part of me says, "No, I was actually looking for some validation from my mother at that time, and I was looking for some emotional care, right? And I maybe wasn't getting it during those years where I may have needed it. I also had issues with my dad, and I got kicked by him, and hit by him, and then got left, right? And consciously or unconsciously, I used to tell myself that I deserved it. I deserved getting hit, and I deserved that. That's like my adult self saying, the reasoning, rationalizing, and saying, I deserve that, so it's okay. But I was about, 8, 9, 10 years old at the time. So when I actually consciously connect with the emotional part of myself as a 10-year-old boy, I felt very ashamed of myself. I felt very like not good enough. Like my dad had beat me down. I was not good enough. I was a piece of shit. And it created a lot of shame and also fear, anxiety, being alone, right? And so these are just some examples that I'm sharing to give you some context into some of those events that you might not have thought about. You might have just swept under the rug or thought, I'm past that, or I deserve that, or it wasn't that bad. Those events actually can create a significant impact. And again, you can't change the past, but you can learn from it. You can go, okay, cool. Well, if that experience has created some kind of feeling of me not being good enough or me not being safe, well, then I know now as an adult I need to actually reprogram my hidden emotional triggers. So if you're being triggered in the present into anxiety, fear, self-doubt, worry, even depression and those kinds of things, or whatever else, frustration, anger, your triggers in the present are trying to show you about things that happened in the past that are still unresolved. And so when you shift your perspective, you can start to then reprogram yourself in the present. And you can go, oh yeah, this trigger that's happening for me now, this anger, frustration, anxiety, is only happening because of these experiences in the past that are still unresolved. So you can allow yourself to feel those emotions instead of just intellectualizing them, because that's what so many men do. They just intellectualize everything. Instead of just intellectualizing, we need to learn how to feel. Once we learn how to feel those emotions, we can process them and we can move forward in the way that we actually want to be moving forward, as opposed to this unconscious self-reinforcing loop that so many men do, and which is exactly what happened to my client. I've been working with him for a few months now, and I can tell as a mindset coach, I need to be sensitive to people's emotional landscape and their inner world, and I could tell that there was something going on. He wasn't quite open about what he had experienced, or he wasn't quite being real or honest with the things that he had experienced. And he had this block up, or this, the limiting belief, which is, it wasn't a big deal, right? And I didn't have anything bad. But when we actually broke through on this call yesterday, it was, it was very clear that the events that happened in the past were shaping his experience of anxiety in the present. And now that he's had that awakening, or that open-mindedness around this event, now he's understanding it differently. Now he can actually see it from that emotional perspective. Now he can start to process and move forward, right, in a way that feels a lot more, you know, safe and calm and peaceful, right? And that's how he's going to overcome his anxiety, right? So you've got to really shift your perspective, right? And this is what so many people don't do, this because of just the societal conditioning. Men should be this way, men shouldn't be emotional, men shouldn't do this, men shouldn't do that, right? It's not about being overly emotional, but it's about understanding your emotions and understanding yourself. Right? You don't have to be someone that like goes and has a whinge or a cry or anything like that. I'm not talking about doing that. I'm talking about understanding your own emotions so that you don't end up going and, becoming an addict, right? This is what happens. People say, I should be strong. Let's just go to the pub and have a beer, right? And they end up with, lots of men who are just addicts, right? In our culture, the generation of men above us are like, there's a lot of addiction, and there's a lot of like, broken marriages, and there's a lot of just shit that's fucked, right? And so if that didn't work for them, right, I wonder why, right? What's going on? Addiction and all those kinds of things are basically because they're trying to deal with their emotions in a certain way, but they just haven't learned how to deal with their emotions properly. So they end up drinking or doing drugs or getting angry and fighting with their wives, and and that's like normal, but it's not normal, right? So you've got to shift your perspective on this idea of trauma. If the older generation was able to look at their past correctly, they would see that that's something that they need to work on. But for most of them, they just suppress everything. However, I actually work with a surprising amount of people in that age bracket from like 40 to 60. And it's great. I even have a couple of clients who are over 60. So people are waking up, right? But we really need to wake up and shift the perspective on trauma so that we can start to heal and become healthier people, right? From there, once we've shifted the perspective, because until that happens, nothing else can happen. Until you've changed your perspective and woken up and become conscious, right, nothing else can happen. But when that does happen, then you can move forward. Then you can start to reprogram your emotional triggers, right? You can start to see your triggers as the key to your freedom, right? You can start to see that these events that are triggering you in the moment, the anger, the frustration, the anxiety, it's just unresolved, suppressed emotions from the past. And when you look at it from that lens and that perspective, that's when you actually get your power back and your ownership and your ability to take responsibility for your emotions. And when you start doing that, right, that's when everything changes. That's when your relationships get better. That's when your health gets better. That's when you get better, right? It's when you actually shift your perspective, take responsibility, and start to consciously change the program, right? Now, this is what I am so passionate about. This is why I'm making this video, because I had this insight with this one client of mine who was a man with anxiety who was making a mistake. And I don't want you to make this mistake. Even if you're a woman, this still applies, but it's especially common for men. I don't want you to make that mistake. I want you to shift the way that you're looking at it, right? And again, you don't have to go into like this soppy, like victim trauma story, because that's not what it's about, right? It's just about having an honest, open understanding of our past so that we can create a better future for ourselves. And so if you want to go deeper with this stuff, then this is exactly the work that I do with my coaching clients week in, week out, right? And so if you want to learn more about the coaching program, I'll put a link in the description where you can go and learn about how to work with me. And there's all the instructions about how to get started. So you can do that if you want. But finally, I just want you to make sure that you don't make this mistake. And at the very least, just start having these conversations where we are having a gentle inquiry into our past, or an open and honest inquiry into what happened in our life. And again, it's not to play the victim story or blame anyone, but it's just to look at it honestly so that we can then have a better understanding of ourselves, which is going to help us in the present and in the future. Okay. And so it's important that we do that instead of continuing to just suppress everything and hide everything, because you might think that that's a strength, but it's not. It's a weakness, right? Vulnerability is the real strength. When you have the ability to be vulnerable and to be open and to say, here I am, this is who I am, and this is what I am, right? This is what happened to me, and this is what I want to create in the future. That is real power. That vulnerability to be seen, right? And to be transparent and to be clear and to be open and to be honest, that is real power. And that is what I want to help you with, right? That's what I want to help everyone with. That's why I make these videos. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.